All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and get started with our joint Health and Human Services and Education and Culture Committee. Our first item on the agenda is an update on school health nurse staffing. I'd like to invite Dr. Travis Gales to come up. I don't see Dr. Kroll, but I think someone is going to be in his stead, maybe from DHHS, or is it just going to be you, Dr. Gales, because that's perfectly fine, and then Lindsey Lucas from our Office of Management and Budget. So just to give a brief context, we've been talking about school health nurses for a very long time, and talking about the large workload that our nurses have had to deal with. We've heard anecdotally from our nurses. I know I personally have had conversations with them at every single one of my education budget forum meetings, as well as in all other kinds of education and culture committee meetings about the challenges that they face and how we need to do more. We continue to hear from our schools, from our principals and administrators about the challenges that our nurses face, and the reality that our world has changed so much that everything from vaping to everything that wasn't there before are things that continue to present challenges for our children. I will just tell you in full disclosure that just this morning my daughter said that she couldn't hear, went to her school health nurse where they helped her clean out her ear. So they do everything there, and it really is something that, I mean, when you talk about someone who's there to ensure that children can get what they need to have done to make sure that their school day runs smoothly and that they can focus on just being at school and doing what school children do is incredibly important. And so I know that we had requested and asked the executive to recommend staffing in last year's budget. We also asked for a subsequent letter to the county executive to ask for a plan for additional nurse staffing. And Ms. Yao, to this date, have we received a response from the county executive?
So we did request some information about, again, what kind of level of school nurses, additional nurses would provide. And so we know now that we need 4 additional school health nurses so that we could have a school health nurse dedicated to each high school in the county. We would need to add an additional 22 school health nurses to have a school health nurse dedicated at each middle school in the county, and then an additional 3 to 6, but right at this point 5, to have one dedicated to every elementary school that has 850 students or more. We also do know generally the cost of the nurse. So again, if the Joint Committee is interested in moving forward with a special appropriation, we have that information.
Excellent. I will just note that we actually recommended, I think, last year on the reconciliation list, placing $1.2 million. That would have been 6 increments of the 205 to add 2 school health nurses positions and could keep incrementing those. I know that according to the American Academy of Pediatric Standards, we're well below where they even recommend we should be when it comes to nurse to student ratios. So we're falling woefully behind in terms of those numbers as well. I don't want to speak for the chair. I'm going to turn to him to give some opening comments, but I know that this is something that, again, as we talk about the well-being of our children and MCPS embarking on the Be Well 365 campaign, it's going to be one in which we really need to ensure that inside and out our children are well taken care of. And so that means that we've got to have a school nursing cohort that's there. I sometimes get criticized for my passion about school resource officers. I wanted to make sure we had a school resource officer at every single one of our high schools. We have that. Now we've added an additional number to start going into our middle schools. We've got to have nurses that are there too. We can't just have officers that are there, even though they're providing a resource. They're not policing our schools, but providing a resource, and we don't have nurses in the same level of capacity. So from that perspective, let me turn to the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee and then see if any of my colleagues have any additional comments as well.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. This obviously is a critically important discussion. As the chairman mentioned, our school health nurses are on the front lines of so many issues. And when you talk about within the mental health space alone, this is a critically important issue, which is literally life or death when it comes to what we're facing within our schools right now. I was greatly dismayed and did not fully process and appreciate the extent to which we are really putting our school health nurses in an untenable situation. When you have the level of need that has grown, when you have the amount of students that we've been adding to schools, but when you also add the complex issues that they bring with them, often as a result directly of poverty, it just puts us in a recipe for disaster. And the fact that we don't yet have a dedicated school nurse at every single high school in the county is ridiculous. And so I really commend my colleagues from the previous council and now this council for pushing ahead and acknowledging that we have to move forward with putting forward these positions. And it's also creating a mental health issues among the school nurses themselves. When I met with a number of school health nurses, I was shocked to find out about how many quit last year alone because of just the quality of life issues that are impacting those school health nurses. And thank God that we have the ones that are there now who are dedicating their lives and in often cases giving up their summer vacations and winter breaks just so that there can be coverage because they're that dedicated. So I look forward to the discussion and look forward to action. And this is something that I know all of us feel very strongly about. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Let me turn to our Council President Navarro.
Thank you so much. So I appreciate the comments of my colleagues, and I agree 100%. As we just recently hosted two youth town halls, both in Clarksburg and in Wheaton, this issue came up quite a bit, and it was clear that this is a resource that we need to strengthen in our schools. And then furthermore, it is going to be really critical that we look at cultural proficiency as well as language proficiency when we are hiring in this space. Now, the answer is always, well, we can't find people who, are qualified. But we do have this really great program called the Welcome Back Center that I would really like for you to look into to see how we can strategically boost what they're doing, because we know that we have a lot of people that come to the county. Some are physicians in their countries of origin, et cetera, who we could really utilize as a resource, but they need to have that kind of support to figure out what they need to do to really, be able to get the particular kind of credentials, et cetera. And so I would really like to, as we explore this, to also get some information for how you're interacting and how you are working with the Welcome Back Center, and what areas do we need to strengthen within their operations in order for us to take advantage of that extraordinary resource and talent that that we have among us.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and I completely agree with those remarks. Again, it's very much akin to our racial equity and social justice lens that we need to place on everything that we're doing. So we're thinking about that, and so I really appreciate that and make sure that we'll focus on that. Dr. Gales, let me turn to you. You've heard from the chairs, you've heard from the Council President in terms of not only our concerns, but where we currently lie. We'd love to hear from you an update before I turn over to the committee for some potential action.
First of all, good afternoon, council members, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all. For the record, Travis Gales, Health Officer and Chief of Public Health Services. So we agree with everything that has been stated so far in terms of the level of work that the school nursing staff puts in, both during the school day, after hours, before hours, during the summertime, in preparation for the school year. They provide a tremendous range of services that extend beyond just clinical services. As we know, and as in many of our conversations that we've had during my time here, is we've discussed the impact of social determinants of health and non-clinical factors that influence health outcomes. And the school health nurse staff is one of the front lines that gets an opportunity to identify, see the impact that social determinants have on student performance and their ability to perform during the school day. And they provide a great resource to identify those needs and help inform other agencies throughout the county, both within Health and Human Services, but also in other agencies as to the types of services that they need. So before going into a little bit more detail about some of the needs, I want to make sure to take this opportunity to thank the school health nurse staff, from the administrators, the senior leadership, down to those on the front line. Certainly there's lots of stuff they do that does not make the press, or the Bethesda Beat or whatever other medium that people read, in terms of literally saving lives, making sure that students who have anaphylactic responses get the necessary treatment that they need in a timely manner, making sure that students who are type 1 diabetics are linked to appropriate services so that their insulin levels and glucose levels are well regulated, and working very closely with our school staff, the MCPS staff, to make sure that students have a healthy and prosperous environment. Now, the level of their services has become increasingly complicated, as mentioned, with increases in student population, but also increases in the COMAR level of expectations due to state regulations in terms of the types of students that they need to oversee and the types of services that need to be provided. Just in the last year, additional expectations in terms of additional vision screenings have been added, as well as the increase based upon the anecdotal stuff that's happening, vaping, and trying to be proactive about identifying the mental health needs of our students. We know that over the last year, the number of the suicide rate has increased across the country, particularly in adolescents and young adults, many of which we have the opportunity to see on a daily basis, and they provide that first line identification and triage. So in addition to population, in addition to the increase in demand, they have a lot on their plates. Now, I don't want to rehash everything that we've discussed before. We've discussed this a number of times. We know the ratios. We know that student to nurse ratio is not as good as our peer counties nearby. Prince George's, the nurse to student ratio is 1 to 693. Baltimore, it's 1 to 647. Anne Arundel, it's 1 to 954. Howard County, there's a nurse in every high school, and no nurse has is assigned to no more than 2 schools. In Montgomery County, our nurse to student ratio is 1 to 1 to every 1,660 students, and our nurses have on average 3 schools to cover. But to go back to the other point is, in the larger context, as we try to move forward and address and keep people healthy in the county, we know that if we get kids on a good trajectory of positive behaviors, both from a somatic standpoint as well as a behavioral and mental health standpoint, their trajectories can be off the charts. And they will become our healthy young adults. They will become a part of a working, productive workforce, and they will be able to contribute in meaningful ways to our county as they get older. But it's important that they have a healthy start. And just as much as we rightfully put in resources to our early child center, we have to make sure that we have the resources for children across the adolescent and young adult pathway and continuum, again, to make sure that they arrive at adulthood fully formed, educated properly, and ready to contribute to the workforce. So I'd be happy to answer any specific questions that you have. Again, don't want to rehash a lot of what has been discussed before, but again, we'll be happy to discuss further.
Now, and I'm going to turn to you, Ms. Lucas, in a second, but Ms. Yao, have we heard from Dr. Kroll? Was he, because I have him on my list scheduled to be here.
I was expecting, but I think that.
I'd be happy to represent the.
Okay, all right. Because I have a couple questions, but let's hear from Ms. Lucas first, and then Mr. Jolanda will turn to you. So, Ms. Lucas.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Lindsey Lucas. I am a fiscal and policy analyst of Office of Management and Budget. And so, yes, we just reiterate, we understand the need and the critical need and the great work that our school health nurses are doing at this time. One of the things that we are looking at are different options of how can we get to where we need to be. We are starting the process of looking at our FY20 budget. I can't tell you right now where that's looking at because we're still running the numbers and trying to understand the full need. The numbers do kind of fluctuate depending on the how big the schools grow and different things like that. And so I know we're working on a comprehensive plan and different options that we will present to the county executive relatively soon to get his feedback and input.
So, Ms. Lucas, thank you for that. I will just say that Montgomery County schools have continued to grow every single year, and it doesn't stop. We had a flattening last year of a modest increase, but this year we now are projected to blow apart those numbers, and again are so the significant number continues to increase, and we're well behind the 8 ball. So there is no catching up. At this point, we're trying to tread water here, and so it requires immediate action. That's the reason why the council put forth the letter that it did, because this is of emergency status. I mean, when you talk about the numbers and the ratio of 1 to 1,660 students, where Prince George's is 1 to 693, a 1,000 student difference in terms of ratio from our neighboring county that's similar sized in terms of school, population, affluence, all the things, right? So again, this is something where it's much larger than just, we'll just try and see and figure it out in this budget. This is an urgent need for now. Let me turn to Councilmember Jolanda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to my colleagues, and thank you all for being here. I also want to reiterate, and I'm glad you did it, Dr. Gales, to thank the nursing staff that work very, very hard. I see we have at least one in the audience, or probably more. There you go. You're blocking. Okay, there we go. A whole row there. Thank you for everything that you all do every day, and for being here. I've heard, whether it's medical distribution alone, the requirements of the paperwork, of all that, the tasks that are being added on to our nursing staff continue to grow, right? And obviously not keeping rate. So, and we know that they help with so many things, whether it's identifying psychosomatic or mental health challenges, how kids are presenting with potential depression. They do a ton. You've talked about this at length, Dr. Gales and others. But they're being forced, while triage is part of their job, I think they're being forced to do a level of triage that is overwhelming. We're doing battlefield triage here, and we shouldn't be. These are students, and we want to make sure that everyone gets met at the point of their needs. So I just wanted to bring up, I have a couple questions. The ratio, I remember when we had a previous briefing on this, we have a different model in that we utilize CNAs at a greater rate, if certified nursing assistants or the equivalent. And I, for example, my daughter suffered a serious injury in school this year, and I never talked to the nurse. I spoke to the CNA primarily, and great person, but I spoke to the principal a lot and other people. But could you give me a sense of what the numbers are for what the CNA breakdown or equivalent? Again, I'm using certified nursing assistant, but the equivalent versus in schools that cover schools versus we know what our nursing ratio is, but do you have that number for what the certified nursing assistant ratio is and how that differs from other jurisdictions?
So I guess the equivalent term is the school health tech.
There we go, school health tech. I'm sorry, I'm using the wrong term.
No worries. There's a school health tech in every school.
And what's the level of education and certification of those people, of those individuals?
Well, it varies. So the differences between the nursing staff and we could get you the formal guidelines and qualifications. It's the nursing staff are registered nurses, higher level of training in terms of acuity, being able to triage, provide a higher level of care. So, for example, in situations where you have more complex students, for example, a student with diabetes or someone who is, I think the best way to explain it is from a clinical standpoint. The difference is from being able to identify symptoms and say, I think it's this. there is a higher level of understanding and knowledge to be able to do a deeper dive on a differential diagnosis, as well as being able to legally provide, in some cases, legally provide a higher level of care to the patient without needing additional help. So, for example, the school health tech would require notifying the nurse in some situations to come in to be able to provide and make provisions of care and treatment that they aren't qualified by their level of training, both by law and then the scope of their services.
Go ahead.
Sorry, we had received this information, but we weren't able to print it out. It was a presentation from School Health to the Commission on Health, and it has a chart on the difference between the role of the school health nurse as well as the school health room technician. I'll just give you a couple of things of what it says. The education for a school health nurse is a 4-year college degree of BSN, whereas school health room tech requires a high school diploma. The licensing requirement for school health nurses, they need to be registered nurses. There's no licensing requirement from the school health tech. There's a minimum experience of working in pediatrics, women's health, or public health for a school health nurse. There's 1 year experience working in any capacity with children for a school health room tech.
That's enough. That was my point, that these are very low level as far as qualifications in the health field. I mean, I'm sure it varies, and I think we need to know that, because if we're going to solve this challenge, right, what I'm seeing of the cost of what it would cost to have a nurse full-time in every 208 schools, well, I think that's where we want to go. I think we would be doing malpractice, pun intended, if we didn't assess the qualifications of the text and see if there's a way to, whether it's support the overall health and well-being of the child by looking at what they're doing and what their qualifications are, and can we help them take more as we grow the number of nurses at the same time. I think we want to be looking at both, and so, but that level is a pretty low level, and it sounds like there's great variation in the number of people. And I also want to underscore the council president's point that the health tech at my daughter's school I'm talking about is an immigrant, and I think had a much higher level of education I know had a much higher level of education in their other country and wasn't able to transfer those skills. So that is a huge component as well. And so as we're thinking of workload and paperwork and all the things that the nurses are having to do, how we incorporate the health techs by upgrading their qualifications and expanding the ability to get people on that pipeline to be a school nurse, we need to look at that whole continuum. Yeah, please, go ahead. And
To that point, that's why I didn't specify the educational criteria, because there is high variability within that. So you may have someone who, even though I may not have the degree requirements, I have extensive experience in the field and may hypothetically be coming from another country where I actually was a practicing physician but didn't translate. And I think to the other point, too, as we think about recruitment and developing a workforce, I think that there are two components to what we're doing that are essential to that. One is young people, and this is something we talked about when I was practicing, is if young people have a positive experience within the healthcare realm, they're more likely to utilize that space as they get older and trust that experience to be able to come in and take advantage of those resources. They're also more likely to consider a career in that field. And so I think as we think about recruitment, we have to look at a host of things, and part of this is making sure that we work closely to provide good examples to our young folks, as well as look at ways to expose them to this field and area of careers as potential options, to build a more diverse pipeline as we move forward. And not only talking about young people, but also as we think about teenagers, and getting them more engaged in their healthcare decisions, as well as, and this is something that we have explored and had a little bit of success so far, is our colleges and universities in the area. As you know, we have a formal partnership with the University of Maryland, and we have recently had some just initial conversations with University of Maryland, Baltimore County, as we recognize that they have the largest percentage of their students come from Montgomery County. And so I think, again, as we look to grow our pool of folks, there are a whole host of different options that we have to think about in addition to those that have been recommended so far.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to associate myself with all the comments made by my colleagues and state that we know that the school-based healthcare professionals are stretched thin. The data clearly show that, and we got to do better. And whether it is helping our students who are using drugs, addicted to drugs, have anxiety, mental health, or as the HHS committee talked about earlier today, vaping that's going on in schools, we know ultimately that healthy students will become better students. And the holistic approach is extremely important. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to turn to Councilmember Albornoz. I just wanted to, there was apparently some confusion about, and so Dr. Gales, you were actually representing yourself and Dr. Kroll, so we've got that squared away. I just got communication from him, so we're good to go there. I would just say that, again, to Councilmember Jolanda's point and to the Council President's point, I think that there needs to be a follow-up to where we discuss how to fill this pipeline. We had great success in our schools in MCPS in transitioning with our SEIU union in terms of how to grow our next cohort of teachers and working with them. And I think that CNAs certainly play a part in the potential to get them to that next level. I would assume that they represent more of that diversity that's there as well. And so certainly from that perspective, it would help us to certainly create some sort of a bridge between our CNAs and getting them to that RN as we look to fill these myriad of positions that are going to be out there, and might provide some more of the cultural competency as well. And of course, looking at our Welcome Back Center, our Gilchrist, all of the other avenues in which we know to where folks have that linguistic flexibility that's there, as well as the professional experience potentially coming from their own countries, we can certainly utilize that. So I think it would behoove us with Mikhail and the representatives from USG, Montgomery College, to all come together to have a work session around that particular topic. They've been great partners with us, those higher ed institutions, in being able to help us get over some of these humps when it comes to employment in some of our areas where we're looking for diversity. Police department, they've done a great job in that. We just heard about the updates there, so there continue to be things that are happening. So, all right, we turn to Chair Albornoz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One thing we haven't mentioned, which is also important and relevant to this discussion, when a nurse is splitting their time between multiple schools, the trust that's developed between the students, but also the administrators of those schools, is critically important. And if that nurse doesn't feel part of the team because they just can't be there as consistently as they'd like to, that also decreases our ability to provide quality care. I think given that, given everything we've discussed, given the stark numbers that have been presented, my colleagues and I are prepared to move forward with a special appropriation supplemental request to add 6 additional school nurses so that we can at the very least have 1 at each high school, and then provide us with some degree of flexibility to get us through the end of this year, acknowledging that this is not exactly where we need to be. In our assessment through the budget process last year, there were actually 22 nurses that were identified to get us to a standard that is just a baseline. But we feel all strongly enough that this is critically important, and we hope to have the executive support of this. And quite frankly, I get that we need to do an assessment and evaluation to determine the best complement and mix, but we've known this is a problem for a long time. And we do need the executive branch here to add a sense of urgency. And whatever is necessary for us to be able to provide support, we're prepared to provide it. But this has reached a level where the safety and security of our kids is paramount. And so I move that we do the special appropriation for 6 additional nurses.
It's been moved and seconded. Councilmember Jolanda.
I'm very supportive of the recommendation. I appreciate the chair. My question is just on the allocation. You mentioned high schools. If it's possible that we could move forward in a way that we allocate the 6, but leave open exactly where they're going to. I mean, obviously we can't direct that. I guess the schools. Well, I guess we could. So that's my question on where they would be direct, because there's some mention in the packet of highest need and how we assess that. And I would just some initial thoughts. Maybe if you had 6 more people, how would you allocate them? I guess maybe that's the question. if you weren't told to put them all in the high schools, which maybe we do, but I'm asking that question.
Well, given that number, we would probably move, since we would need 4 to staff all of the high schools, we would probably move in that direction to cover that base, and then begin to look at our other areas of need. So the three areas of need are getting all the high schools staffed, all the middle schools staffed, and then the third component is on the elementary level, making sure that we have those schools that have populations over 850 staffed as well.
Because I would imagine within even that within the 25 high schools, within the, however many middle schools we have, 70 or whatever it is, 60 some middle schools, there's going to be variation in the level of need. And again, I'm assuming you're going to prioritize that. So how do you currently do that? And could you talk about, because not all middle schools are going to, while all students have needs, we have a limited number. How would you prioritize that?
Well, it's prioritized by population, geography, and some level of acuity in terms of services. And then, for example, but the high schools, if there's a wellness center present, things like that. So there's a lot of different factors that go through the senior administration team for school health services, and I know that Joni Glick, who's the senior administrator, is sitting to my right, behind my right.
Doing a lot of nodding.
Yes.
So you're doing a good job.
Yes. But so a lot of factors go into that each year, and I know they spend a lot of time looking at the numbers, looking at the level of services provided in the previous year to inform how they are staffed.
Well, maybe it's just a follow-up of like me just being more informed in the joint committee on how you go about that process. Obviously, the need is there. It would be great to have some analysis on how you're going to go about it and what factors you're using, knowing moving forward.
We're happy to provide.
Yeah, thank you.
Council President Navarro.
Thank you. Yeah, I was also wondering, in anticipation of the budget request from the executive, if it's possible to receive, for the Joint Committee, to receive an action plan of sorts so that we understand what, exactly how many are needed, where, and then perhaps how we could have entertain a couple of scenarios so that we could finally get to a place where we can feel comfortable with the coverage, because it's a little daunting to, even as we're moving 6, it's kind of like, we need so many more. It would be great to be able to have some kind of a phased-in approach and some options for us to consider during budget.
Yeah, it's very interesting because the 6 that we're putting forward today is half of what we put on the reconciliation list for last year, just to be very clear. And so from that perspective, and I shouldn't even say last year because it was earlier this year when we asked for that. And so that showed the level of urgency that we had then, and it continues to grow. Our school system has grown by over 2,000 children since then. And so we have not grown our cohort of nurses and are now even worse off than we were before, which is why there's this level of urgency. I would want to say that in my tenure here on the council, of course, I'm superseded by the council president, but in the time that I've been here, we haven't had that many special appropriations. They're very rare. And we understand how it presents a challenge to the executive branch from a budgeting perspective. If we did not feel that this was of the emergency nature it is, we wouldn't do this. We don't do this lightly. But this is certainly something where we continue to hear, you heard Chair Albornoz talk about the burnout that our nurses are experiencing. We hear about the challenges of things falling through the cracks because nurses can't be in 3 places at once. These are the kinds of continuous challenges that really provide some great concern for us. And so we certainly want to make sure that we're doing all we can to make sure that our children are safe in our schools and that they're getting the appropriate services that they need from a school health nurse standpoint. So we have a motion that's before us and it's been seconded without objection. All right. That is the will of the body. All right, now I will turn it over to Council Chair Albornoz to walk us through the second item for our joint committee.
Thank you very much. Want to thank Councilmember Glass, who requested this joint committee session to explore our food security for youth initiatives and programs here in the county. One of the cool things about having been around the county for 12 years is you know the background on a lot of stuff. And I have to give a lot of credit to our council president and then council member Valerie Irvin, who after the Kennedy cluster initial survey was done of students and parents, one of the very clear holes, we were expecting students to report wanting more STEM programming, wanting more sports. They reported back that they wanted hot meals. That's right. They reported back that they wanted meals in the summer. And so then newly minted Councilmember Navarro and Councilmember Irvin took immediate action with support of the executive branch and launched the summer nutrition program, which I'm also quite proud has expanded through some very creative programs and services provided by my, I'll never say former, my colleagues in the Department of Recreation. And I really want to credit somebody who's in the audience, and that is Robin Riley. We were approached by the school system because after the summer nutrition program was launched, the numbers were lower than people had anticipated. Students were not taking as advantage of the services we expected. And so in a conversation on the way home on a Friday night, Robin and I compared notes, and she suggested, well, why don't we add a recreational component to some of the summer nutrition program, which almost immediately paid dividends and added a number of participants to the program. And so I'm very excited to now be on this side of the aisle to hear where we are with regards to the summer nutrition program and see what more can be done moving forward. So thank you again, Councilmember Glass, for requesting this. And because you requested it, I'd like to turn it over to you to see if you have any initial questions, and then certainly to any of my colleagues for opening comments as well.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Chair. As I just said earlier regarding the previous conversation, I think this was a really well-planned joint committee because, again, healthy students hopefully will result in better students. And so whether it is nurses in the schools or food in the tummy, these are all things that we need to do a better job of. And it was over the summer when I was looking at official activities to participate in, and I was looking to see what summer programs for students I could engage in and help out with, and realized that there were some gaps in services, which was the nexus for this conversation. And as the packet shows, there's a large majority of our summer school programs, summer food programs, that end in August. And of the 124 program sites throughout the county, only 15 were open through August, and nearly 60% close at the beginning of August. And we know that there are 31 days in August and kids still need food. And that is why I asked for this hearing today. And then I'll just share with you also that the food insecurity issue is larger than MCPS, but this conversation is focused on that. And just last week, my office and I went to Progress Place and served 125 meals to individuals who are in need of the 117,000 that they provide every year. And I appreciate this joint committee hearing to figure out how we can close the gaps in food services for all the students, because ultimately we know that no kid should go hungry. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Chairman Rice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I just wanted to just very briefly thank MCPS as well as Recreation, Department of Health and Human Services for working, because I've seen the advances that we've made over each summer in terms of the number of locations where we're providing healthy meals, even working in some areas where folks might not want you to be. The reality is that we continue to push the envelope in terms of making sure that those students who need it are trying to be connected with the services that we know are so vitally important. And so just wanted to, again, thank you for your outside of the box thinking, continuing to understand how just important this is, as you heard from my colleagues, and continuing to do the good work that we know is still not reaching everyone but we will continue to do better each and every year. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. Council President Navarro.
Yeah, I'd like to add my appreciation. I think that, once upon a time, the collaboration was not as apparent. And I think it speaks to the professionalism and desire to constantly look at ways to improve, that this collaboration with HHS, the Department of Recreation, the school system, and all of nonprofit organizations really has made a huge difference. And so I really want to acknowledge that, and also to say that, we're talking about youth, but it is important for me to bring up that just a couple of weeks ago, maybe a week ago, we also approved a special appropriation to provide meals for seniors at the newly opened, Wheaton Recreation Center Library, because there is such a need there as well. And so, again, I think that we're so fortunate to have so many assets that we can leverage, not just in terms of facilities, but just in terms of our amazing people that work both in county government and the school system, as well as the nonprofit organizations, to constantly look at ways for us to reach those who need it most. And Councilor Miller-Bernas, that quote that you just shared when we were looking at the Kennedy Cluster Project and we were doing all the research, and how shocking it was for us to read in the responses from the survey for the young people in high school that their number one desire was to have a warm meal for dinner. And these are teenagers, and so this was roughly 2008, I think. So we know that this continues to be an issue, and really want to thank everybody for continuing to work and figuring out how we can best leverage the resources that we have. Thank you.
All right, thank you. If you guys could introduce yourselves, and then we'll get started with the presentation.
Good afternoon. I'm Susan McCarron, Director of the Division of Food and Nutrition Services for Montgomery County Public Schools.
Jeannie Dawson, Director of Materials Management, Montgomery County Public Schools.
Thomas Tippett from the Office of Performance Innovation.
Amanda Nesha, Food Security Programs Manager for the Montgomery County Food Council.
Travis Gales, County Health Officer.
And if we could get the Recreation Department to represent us at the dais as well, that would be great. You guys are an important part of this discussion. All right, whoever would like to start to give sort of an overview and presentation, by all means.
So we're going to hear first from MCPS and then followed by County Stat, or Mr. Tippett, then Ms. Nesher from the Food Council, and then we'll get comments from DHHS as well as Recreation.
So we're happy to be here today. We all know that childhood nutrition doesn't end at the end of the school year, and the summer school program or summer meals program is to fill that gap, especially in our low-risk areas, high-risk areas, I'm sorry. And this year, we had 124 sites operating, and in those sites could be multiple programs that occur. And we serve just for through the summer meals program like about 470,000 meals. And in July, it was our all-time high. We actually served a lot more meals in July compared to the previous 4 years. We did have our 2 innovative calendar schools this past year that were pilots. So they were still served in the summer, but they were not under the summer meals program. They were under the National School Meals Program. These 2 sites were ELO sites the prior years. So, but in thinking about that, we served over 508,000 meals, which was even higher if you factor those 2 schools in during the summer. I thank our partnerships with Park and Recs. We also partner with libraries. We have our 2 mobile sites that have been operating since 2016, and we are happy that we've been able to keep that partnership with those 2, and we are always looking to have even more mobile sites where we can provide meals. That's all we need to provide. We don't need a partnership with another activity or event. And, we not only serve, we also partner with faith-based organizations, churches, synagogues. So we're always looking for partnerships with other people, and we appreciate the Parks and Recs who have just been definitely a great group to collaborate with, and we're always there and looking for new areas and sites to serve students. That's not an issue with the Division of Food and Nutrition Services, because we can provide the meals as long as we have a location. And they're in the areas that are 50% or more free and reduced. And we also too look to open more sites as well, because we know that way we can feed more students, more children in the community throughout the year, throughout the summer.
Wait till bring up my presentation, but I commend you all for taking a data-driven approach to solving this issue. The question is when, and we hope that there are two models to the summer meals program, both the closed enrollment and the open meal site model, and there are some eligibility requirements around that. So to have an open meal site, you have the percent of students receiving farms in that school has to be over 50%. So with that being understood, I'm just going to kind of jump into the data. I was asked to analyze the summer meals program data from summer 2019 and make recommendations if resources became available, where in the county would the county receive the best value in locating one of these new summer meal sites. So on the visualization, you can see the 124 meal sites that served meals in summer 2019. 62,000 of those meals were in an open site program, so anyone can walk in and receive meals, and we believe that to be the most equitable and efficient model for providing and achieving the goals of the summer meals program, which is to bridge the gap and provide some nutritious meals to students in need during the summer months. So that's really where our analysis focused on. We analyzed 199 conventional elementary, middle, and high schools. There's actually 200 schools, but Snowden Farm Middle Elementary School is relatively new, and we didn't have data for it. But we began our analysis by looking at the places of need in the county, and this is not news to any of you. We know where these locations are: Germantown, Gaithersburg, Montgomery Village, Twin Brook, Aspen Hill, Wheaton, White Oak, Fairland, Long Branch. Those are the areas of need, and our elementary school service area farms rates coincides with those areas. So we then looked at where are we serving versus where is the need. So the county and MCPS have done a great job in reacting to the changing demographics of our county. We serve summer meals in some form or fashion in the highest needs in the county. On the map, you can see all elementary school service areas that have over 150 farm students in them, and the gray areas are places where summer meals are served. In the pink and red areas are locations where there's no current resources, and we'll focus on those today. So the open meal site model, again, we believe this to be the gap of, the question was when are the meals served, and we do know that 60% of our summer meal sites have closed down by August 2nd. So there's only 40% capacity from August 2nd all the way till September 3rd after when the school year starts. So we're looking to bridge that gap, and we believe that this open meal site network is the way to bridge that gap. When those summer schools and summer camps are closing down, they get the referral to our open meal sites, and then they can come and receive that same service almost all the way up until school starts. So we're looking to expand the open enrollment network that we have. We currently have 13 meal sites that serve meals through this open network model. So there's no enrollment or registration, which, you know, when there's a language barrier, registration becomes a major barrier. And in these locations, they're walk-in sites. So we focused on optimizing the net coverage of the open meal network that you see here. So as I said, the eligibility requirements are 50% farms, so there are 67 schools in the county that meet this criteria. So these are the areas of focus that we're going to look for our new location in. So we used two variables. We both used students in need and proximity. On the visualization, you can see all 199 elementary, middle, and high schools based on the percent of students receiving farms on the vertical axis, and on the horizontal axis, we look at the proximity to the current open network, so the nearest open meal site to that school. And in the top left quadrant, you can see the schools that we're going to analyze today and look for potential open meal sites for the summer of 2020 to hopefully bridge the gap in our open meal site network. So we looked at the farms rate within each and every school, but we also look at if we were to propose a new meal site, we look at the students that would now be closest to that meal site and the number of students receiving farms that will now be closest to that meal site. And that's a fundamental concept of any type of service area or gap analysis. But we took it a step further because you could propose a new meal site in a high-need area, and many students would now be closest to this new location, but you'd cannibalize the current resources that we have in our open enrollment network. So, for example, if I open and operate a Starbucks on Maryland Ave, and I open one on Monroe Street, I may see a net marginal increase in revenue, but 90% of the people that are going to my Monroe Street location already were going to my Maryland Ave location. So we're looking to diminish the effects of cannibalism on our current open enrollment network, and you will all understand what I mean in just one moment. So what we've done is we've analyzed the 13 locations and said these are the service areas that we would potentially pull students from. So this is our current open enrollment network, and we analyzed schools that didn't have current resources within their immediate school boundaries. So we analyzed elementary schools that were eligible but had no closed enrollment and no open enrollment sites in their immediate school service area. So 4 of those locations, Dr. Sally Ride, Waters Landing, and Flower Hill Elementary, we don't estimate that would produce any net coverage in the network, but Twin Brook would net coverage of the network in both the Veers Mill Triangle and the kind of East Rockville, Lincoln Park area. And we estimate that 1,241 elementary students would now be closest to this location that currently weren't in proximity to the open enrollment network. We also looked at 4 other locations in the county that currently have closed enrollment programming, but again, we're looking to cover the gap in August, which we're expecting that this is going to be what's going to cover the gap, is developing these hubs of open enrollment network locations all the way until the start of school. So we, Cannon Road Elementary, Jackson Road Elementary, Springbrook High School, and White Oak Middle are potential eligible locations where we could locate this open enrollment site, and it would net us coverage in the Colesville, White Oak, and Fairland area. Newport Mill Middle would net us coverage in the Randolph Hills area, Wheaton, kind of along Veers Mill and the east side of the Pike. Meadow Hall Elementary is in the Rockville and would net us coverage along the Norbeck corridor and could potentially be located at Rockville High School, which would be more transit accessible. And last but not least is Brown Station Elementary in South Germantown, which would net us coverage and kind of cover a gap that we have in South Germantown. So this is what Mr. Glass was talking about. We have 124 locations, and this curve is showing the start dates. So we ramp up from the end of school, January 16th, on to the beginning of July, and we're basically get up to 92% of our locations are serving meals during the month of July, and then they very quickly fall off on August 2nd, August 9th, August 16th. And we see this open meal model to be the potential scalable gap that we can cover. So if there's any questions, I can follow up with any potential schools that you may see in on slide either 15 or 16, and we can answer any questions.
Council President Navarro.
Thank you so much. Well, first I am reminded that as we just adopted the racial equity and social justice legislation, that, you know, what you were just describing in terms of how you're using data to map all of these particular points and doing that gap analysis is really how we're going to be able to implement that legislation as well. So I appreciate that kind of a very targeted approach. I did want to ask you, you did say that you had a plan, you know, to expand after you looked at that gap analysis, and then you talked about the issue of cannibalizing. But how are you incorporating the sort of variable of transportation in order for us to maximize the access? You know, after all these programs have closed, and I know that that's where we have the gap, but how are we accounting for transportation in terms of access?
So as part of the program, it doesn't have to be school-based, and many of our elementary schools are not right on the Pike or right on Veers Mill Road or right on University. They're usually tucked back in a residential neighborhood. But within the school service area, the eligibility still applies. So a more transit accessible location can be chosen as long as it's within the eligible school service area. Does that make sense? Okay. We can certainly analyze the actual transit accessibility in terms of routes, trips, and things like that connected to our public transportation network, but doing that at scale is a bit difficult.
Okay, so when I was looking at your presentation and you were talking about the concept of, you know, cannibalizing, and you were showing specific schools and where, you know, what was going to be the coverage area. So I know I saw Cannon Road, for example, and then you spoke about White Oak, Springbrook High School. So are you saying that you would locate the program at Cannon Road, and that you expect that folks from the Springbrook catchment area, White Oak, Jackson Road could then go there to access the meals?
Yes.
Is that the concept?
That's the concept. As the closed enrollment school programming closes down August 2nd,
Cannon Road will become the hub.
Correct.
Right, but then since I live right across from Councilmember Jolanda, I know for a fact that obviously, you know, students that would go to Jackson Road, Springbrook High School, or White Oak, going all the way to Cannon Road is not necessarily a kind of transit-oriented, rich type of situation. So what I'm trying to figure out is how are we accounting for access to the transportation that is needed, because as we roll out these kinds of really awesome programs, that might be a major barrier that then we will not be able to, you know, to have the outcomes that we're looking for. So I just want to make sure that as you're looking at your plan, that you're also thinking about things like a circulator bus or, you know, something to that effect, because that will definitely be a challenge, and especially if we're talking about, you know, low-income families, as you're looking, as you're using farms as that proxy, probably parents that have to, you know, have multiple jobs maybe, or they don't, you know, necessarily have a lot of access. So I just want to make sure that we're doing that, because I really appreciate the concept of the hub. I just worry that we're not going to have the access that, you know, the transportation that is going to be needed. Okay. And when will you come back with the plan? Like you were saying that you have a plan to kind of fill that gap. When will we hear about the?
I don't know about a plan. These are the recommended locations if resources became available to open up the site.
Because I think I wrote down that you had a plan of sorts, so I thought maybe we were going to be receiving a plan. Is that during budget?
I don't think there was a specific request to come up with the plan, though certainly we could ask MCPS to work with county stat, to work with other partners.
I would love to see that. 'Cause
Yeah, absolutely.
If not, then this briefing is not necessarily that useful. I think we need to know where are the potential, where's the opportunity and how much money would that cost, require?
Sure. I think that, the mapping is an opportunity to look at where are needs, where are unmet needs. In your packet, there's a whole list of different barriers, and Ms. Nesher will also talk about, again, issues related to food security and barriers to reaching kids. But again, I think this is a discussion or a plan would involve a number of different partners to come back and say, this is how we propose to move forward. Hopefully, this was an overview briefing to kind of show you what's the demand, what's the unmet need.
I understand, let me just be honest. Obviously, that mapping, we are very familiar with that mapping. This is not new, so we know that. I know I personally am just kind of interested in how could we, once again, just like with the school nurses, can react to some kind of a plan that is a phased-in approach of sorts, and then doesn't just look at the school sites, but for example, like the new Wheaton Library Rec Center. I know that now that building has become such a hub for that community. So if we can take that into consideration, and it's transportation rich and, all of that as well, because that might help us mitigate some of that transportation sort of challenges. If there are other facilities that are, frequented and parents are already using it, et cetera, maybe we can use some of those sites instead of using schools that may be so tucked in neighborhoods that folks may have a hard time reaching it. Thank you.
And just one of the things to just add into that is we definitely want to help to support looking at those different areas, because we also know that parents are concerned about the safety of their students walking on their own to different locations. So we would want to work with that as well. And the other thing that we have to consider too is in terms of the schools, do they have construction going on? We know that 2 of the 4 schools that were mentioned will have HVAC replacements over the summer. So, we have to take a really good look at the list, because this was kind of an awareness raising and research on our parts to work together towards that. But we want to increase that because we know how important it is for our students to have that opportunity in August the whole time. So, there hasn't been an action plan yet, but that's still what we need to work with our partners on and be innovative in terms of the ideas of working with different avenues that would be more accessible to kids and places that we could support. One of the other things that we are also trying to do is, increase the idea of the mobile unit. That has just been an amazing thing to work in our different communities in Gaithersburg and Germantown. So, this is the beginning of hopefully a new approach and an innovative approach to the work.
So we've got 2 lights. I'll go in order. Councilmember Glass, followed by Councilmember Jolanda.
Thank you very much. I love myself a good map, and as the council president said, the larger countywide maps are not new to us. The heat maps typically are very similar across the board for various issues, but the meal network site maps I think are very creative, trying not to cannibalize on existing locations, being thoughtful and deliberate in how we move forward is exactly the way we need to go. And picking up on the direction that the council president was going on regarding transportation, recognizing that kids have access to bus routes for free during summer, during all the other times. Let me ask you the back-ended question there. How are individuals accessing our programs currently? Because if we know how they're getting to these programs now, that will help instruct us on how they'll get to future ones.
Well, speaking for the summer schools, it would be, they already have summer school bus routes. I think Parks and Recs, I'll let you speak to that. Our open sites, libraries, and they walk to those sites. That's how I would say that they reach. The majority of it are, summer school and Parks and Recs. There's also the boys and girls, so however they're, dropped off for their parents or guardians in the morning. I'm sure some of them are close in vicinity and can walk, but that's how.
So they're already hubs, they're already at places where activities are taking place. No one's necessarily going out of their way for any of this. One other aspect of the mapping that might prove useful is overlaying the ride-on Metro bus routes onto them to make sure that they are directly transit accessible. Thank you.
Councilmember Jolanda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just on the transportation point, I'm so glad the Council President brought it up. And you still have this slide up. Of those 4 schools mentioned in this example, and this is, you could do this with all of them, you know, White Oak Middle School is the most accessible from a transportation standpoint. It's right on New Hampshire Avenue. It's a hub for many bus stops in the morning, for example. I don't know what else is going on there, if that was a cannibalization question, but just from an access point, that would, to me, just because I know this area very well, would make a lot more sense than Cannon Road, which is deeply embedded in a community, and where most of the kids don't come from schools within the residential neighborhood. Most of them are coming from White Oak or other places up the street. And to your mobile point, in the case of White Oak, as an example, and I'm sure there's other places in the county where you could come to like the White Oak Shopping Center or a hub where a lot of kids, once you do the data on where the kids are, I'm not saying that would be it, but, you know, factor that into this analysis too, because I think, you know, it's one thing to just say here, there's no programs and this theoretically would be a good spot, but it's another thing to how are kids actually getting here. The vast majority of kids that go to Cannon Road are going to be bussed in by, you know, and that's not going to be available during this gap period. So I would suggest that you do that type level of analysis at every proposed site, and I'm not, you know, as you're going forward, in addition to the plan that the Council President discussed. But glad we have this. We're thinking this way, and just a couple of suggestions as we try to implement it and roll it out.
I did have one question. The Council President referred to our youth town halls. I've been going to those for 12 years, and there hasn't been one that the quality of the food or the variation of the food hasn't come up. Could you describe for us what the summer meal actually encompasses, what's in it? And do we track how much of it kids are actually, in fact, consuming, eating?
So I'll answer the latter one first. We don't track. For that reason, some of the meals are taking place at a summer rec site. So, you know, we don't track or see what they do or don't. They are our share tables where items can be placed just like during the school year. So if a student is still hungry or wants something else, and that's how we encourage using that. Also, our summer sites for rec sites, we do have a cold bag meal. So because they are being delivered to the different rec sites or community centers, and it has a main entree, usually a sandwich, could be a salad, there's a fruit, vegetable, milk component. In our summer schools and the actual school sites, during summer school programs, we have a hot meal, and that's for breakfast and lunch. Breakfast is the same as well. If it's a community center or a recreation center, or a site that's not a school-based site where there's no heating facility or there's not somebody there to run those programs, then they are bag meals. But they always have their complete meal. They have to have fruit, vegetable, a milk, and a main entree.
Great, thank you. I know another barrier in the past to some participation, and this is just generally out-of-school time programs, is students having to take care of younger siblings, which prevents them from being able to access a location. And I wonder if moving forward, we may want to consider students that actually obviously physically come to the location, but then giving them some flexibility to take a meal home to the younger sibling who may or may not be able to arrive themselves.
That is prohibited through the regulations.
Oh.
Unfortunately, meals have to be consumed on site.
Interesting.
It's food safety, right?
I was going to say, you're going to hear from, again, Ms. Nesher for the Food Council, and I think there's other options in addition to the MCPS Summer Meals Program to get food to kids.
Okay, so I'm getting ahead of us.
Adrienne Clutter, Division Chief Recreation. I will add that at our mobile sites, where young people can come 18 and under, the activities may be geared towards the majority of the young people who are there, like elementary school, middle school. However, we have seen high school students bring their little brother, walk up, because it is community-based. And just to talk about some of the transportation barriers, the mobile site is pretty creative. We've tested out a few locations. We had a park one summer in Germantown, the mobile home park in Germantown, where we know young people are isolated by major roadways. It's successful just for outreach in general to that particular community as well.
All right, thank you. Let's move on to the next presentation.
Great. Just wait for the presentation to come up. But in the meantime, thank you very much, Council Members Albanaz and Rice, and the members of the Joint Committee for inviting me here today. And thank you also to Councilmember Glass for your interest in highlighting this issue, and also for the opportunity to participate in this conversation. So really what I'm going to talk about today is to highlight those community-based organizations that provide meals, snacks, bags, or other food items to children, specifically when school is out for the summer, as well as... Yeah. Oh, no, I'm good. Thanks. As well as some other opportunities for families with children to access nutritious food during July and August. So currently more than 60,000 people in Montgomery County are food insecure. That means they don't know where their next meal is coming from. And at least 30,000 of those are children. For children and adolescents in particular, food insecurity creates challenges in education and development. According to a 2017 study by the Department of Pediatrics at Boston University School of Medicine, starting in preschool and elementary school, children in food insecure households have higher rates of behavioral and emotional problems. Elementary and high school children from food insecure households are more likely to repeat a grade and more likely to have frequent absences and disciplinary problems. And for food insecure adolescents, there are higher rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide attempts. Food insecurity hurts our communities and widens the achievement gap. So you've heard from MCPS and you'll hear from the Rec Department about their respective summer feeding programs. So I won't mention them here other than to say that they're doing an amazing job to try to close the hunger gap for children during the summer. However, according to a 2018 report from the Food Research and Action Center, only 21.8% of children on free and reduced price meals in Maryland are participating in federal summer nutrition programs. Trying to ascertain why that is and increasing the number of children accessing summer meals programs is why we're here today. In addition to federal summer nutrition programs, other opportunities for children and their families to access food in the summer include, of course, the SNAP program, which is a federal nutrition program helping eligible residents to stretch their food budget every month. Maryland Hunger Solutions released a report earlier this year which estimates that of all the people in Montgomery County eligible to enroll in the SNAP program, 64% are not enrolled. That's the highest rate for any county in Maryland. There are many assumed reasons for this, including fear, especially around the issue of public charge, stigma, language barriers, and general lack of knowledge about the program. But the fact is, if more people were enrolled in SNAP, there'd be more money for families to purchase food, both during the summer and also throughout the rest of the year. There's also the Summer SNAP for Children Act, which was enacted by the Maryland State Legislature this year to expand access to healthy food while school is out. The program provides an extra $30 per child per month in SNAP benefits during July and August, and $10 per child during winter break for families receiving SNAP. The state set aside $200,000 of funding for this program in 2020, and counties must submit an application and match or exceed any funding provided by the state. In addition, the legislation requires the state to apply for a federal grant program called the Summer EBT program, which will increase state funding for the Summer SNAP for Children Act in future years. The Montgomery County Department of Health and Human Services has already applied to host a pilot for the Summer SNAP for Children Act with a $100,000 match, which is fantastic, and expects a response from the state DHS in early December. But this pilot would serve approximately 1,574 children. I want to take a moment also to thank a local advocacy group, the Critical Issues Forum, whose representatives are here today in the audience, for their tireless work in advocating the passage of this legislation. The WIC program, you all know, provides federal grants to states for supplemental foods, healthcare, referrals, and nutrition for low-income pregnant, breastfeeding, and postpartum women, and to infants and children up to age 5. Unlike for SNAP, residents who are undocumented are able to participate in this program, which likely accounts for the fact that, according to the Maryland WIC office, Montgomery County's WIC enrollment rate is the highest in America, at 64% of need. Since WIC participants can also use the Farmers Market Nutrition Program to buy food and sometimes even double their dollars, encouraging as many residents as possible to apply for and continue to receive WIC benefits increases overall food insecurity, especially in families with young children and especially during the summer. Farmers markets present a wonderful seasonal opportunity to purchase fresh, healthy produce during the summer. The problem is that such produce is often too expensive for low-income residents to afford. However, many farmers markets in Montgomery County accept WIC and SNAP benefits at market, and many also participate in programs that match WIC and SNAP dollars to give more purchasing power to low-income residents. For example, at Crossroad Community Food Network's farmers market located in Tacoma Park, just during June, July, and August 2019, shoppers spent $5,000 in SNAP and $28,000 in WIC. That was matched by fresh checks, so doubled. And as you're also no doubt aware, there are many wonderful nonprofit organizations providing county children with critical access to food during the summer when school is out. Not only do many of them work in conjunction with MCPS and the rec department at their sites, but they also operate separately to help plug gaps that, due to federal restrictions, summer meals program sites cannot reach. Manna Food Center's Smart Sacks program provides weekly backpacks of food to children at specific sites during the summer. For 2019, 17 schools were served, 3 of which were also summer meal sites and 2 of which were fun food and fitness program sites, with a total of 7,477 bags being provided over 4 to 6 weeks, depending on the school. According to Manna, all the recipients of Smart Sacks are either part of the Linkages to Learning program and or students identified by counselors or school staff to be in the most need. Most, if not all, are on free and reduced price meals, and some may have siblings that get extra bags to account for the larger family size. The majority of families receiving weekend bags are Hispanic, but there are also many African immigrants, African Americans, and a smaller percentage of Asian, white, or other minorities. Nourish Now, another local nonprofit that rescues and distributes food, provides breakfast, lunches, snacks, and beverages to approximately 4,000 students in need during the summer. The food is provided to local summer camps that don't have extra funding to purchase food for their campers. Kids in Need distributors, or KIND, assist schools that have summer programs by providing weekend bags. In 2019, over 4 weekends during the summer, they delivered food to a total of 720 children at 6 elementary schools. Women Who Care Ministries provides weekend bags over the summer also. They serve the same students who receive weekend bags during the school year and deliver the bags to the school every Friday in July and during the first week in August. And they estimate 500 students throughout the county will use their program in 2020. The Up to Us Foundation is a recently established nonprofit that provides weekend bags over the summer to students at Harmony Hills Elementary. 60 bags a week were provided this summer. Last but not least, and especially because not every food insecure person residing in Montgomery County is able to participate in federal programs due to immigration status or income eligibility requirements, there are many organizations that provide year-round food assistance to families. The Food Assistance Resource Directory, which I think you have copies of, is available in English and Spanish, in hard copy and online, and lists more than 70 food assistance providers in the county, providing information about location, opening hours, and the type of food assistance provided in order to connect residents to providers. More than 3,000 copies have been distributed through the county in schools, healthcare settings, food assistance sites, community centers, colleges, and DHHS locations. Perhaps the most important recommendation here on this list is to invest more time, funding, and resources in exploring this topic in more detail. While we tried our best to be thorough for this hearing, the time frame was limited, and we weren't able to get detailed information on some programs. These recommendations here are based on discussions with organizations that provide weekend bags, information given by food assistance providers and healthcare providers at our monthly working group meetings, research on comparative practices, and resident feedback captured in listening sessions and from members of our Food Security Community Advisory Board. So the first recommendation is to expand existing programs. Obviously, we've talked about summer meal sites. But, for example, the number of weekend bag sites could be increased. The Smart Sacks program only used to be able to serve elementary schools, so available sites were limited. But for 2020, the contract was expanded to serve any MCPS school, which will increase the number of sites the program reaches. However, expanding programs like these goes hand in hand with the need to ensure funding to maintain and increase their reach. Partners also highlighted that looking beyond schools to find communal sites that families from multiple schools frequent, so as you were talking about libraries and other places, community centers, in order to get around challenges like effectively advertising the program and also the limited availability of school staff during summer vacations to help distribute the bags, which are not part of the MCPS or REC department programs. Another suggestion was to increase coordination and provision of services at weekend bag sites so that multiple services can be provided at each site to ensure coverage of family needs. And increasing the number of summer meal sites, again, we talked about that. While there are requirements for eligibility that limit the ability of some sites to qualify, there are nevertheless opportunities to explore site expansion. Crossroads Community Food Network is currently conducting a feasibility study to see if they can become a site. And it's our hope that other community partners and faith institutions might also consider applying. I recently attended a conference workshop on how hospitals and healthcare clinics can register to become federally reimbursable summer meal sites. Apparently it's not as difficult as it might sound because hospitals already have kitchens, cafeterias, and staff that can help. The second recommendation is to reduce barriers to accessing resources. So we talked about transportation. Even if the number of summer meal sites is increased, children still need to be able to safely, comfortably, and affordably get to those sites. Partnerships that include transportation options would be explored so that working parents who leave their children at home during the summer can feel confident that their children are in safe hands from the moment that they leave home to the moment they get back home. And as we know, federal nutrition benefits programs are extremely effective at combating hunger. However, as I said before, Montgomery County has the lowest rate of SNAP participation among eligible residents out of all the counties in Maryland. Further investment by the county in SNAP outreach would help to bridge this gap and allow families to double their dollars to buy fresh, healthy produce at many of the county's farmers markets. My colleague, Diana Tato-Niktash, at the Department of Health and Human Services, has spearheaded a program at school-based health centers in which every child is screened for food insecurity at every appointment and referred to federal nutrition assistance programs and local food assistance providers and other resources when they screen positive. The Food Council created a Screen and Intervene toolkit, which you have copies of as well, which walks service providers through how they can implement screen and intervene processes at their sites. Implementing these processes in schools, health clinics, and other service locations would prevent food insecure individuals from missing out on available resources to feed themselves and their families, both during the summer but all year round. Another barrier affecting food access during the summer is the limited amount of funding that the state has set aside for the Summer SNAP for Children Act. Only $200,000 was earmarked for this program to be divided by as many counties as apply. Granted, each county must themselves match or exceed that funding, and Montgomery County, as I said, has very generously set aside $100,000 for the first year. But the fact remains that only 1,574 children will be reached in 2020. So further advocacy at both state and county level must be undertaken to prioritize and increase the funding for this program in future years. Last but not least, and as I mentioned earlier, additional research must be undertaken to understand the nuances of this issue. There is no one-size-fits-all approach, and all of the programs mentioned today work in different ways to reach as many children as possible. Weekend bag programs can be located at sites not subject to the 50% farms eligibility rate necessary for meal sites. And the Food, Fun and Fitness program provides programming that reduces stigma and encourages a healthy and active lifestyle. The Summer SNAP for Children Act and SNAP and WIC programs work to reach those families that are unable or unwilling to send their children to external sites to receive food. And the MCPS Summer Meals program targets children in areas of extreme need. Further research might also reveal other models for summer food delivery that could be adopted by Montgomery County. A preliminary scan of best practices revealed some innovative local initiatives, such as a federally reimbursed community summer barbecue program in Fairfax County, Virginia, which served 200,000 meals in 2018, and visits to a teaching farm for children to experience planting, harvesting, and cooking as part of a summer meals program in Stanton City, Virginia. There are many challenges around increasing summer food access options for children, but there are also many opportunities, and the Food Council is grateful to all of our community partners who are working to solve this, and especially to the members of this joint committee for your interest in this issue and your commitment to finding solutions for our county's children.
Thank you very much. Obviously the good news is there's a lot going on and in a number of key areas, but it was pointed out that no one organization owns all of it, and it feels solid but disjointed a little bit just because there's so many programs in so many different areas. And so I think that we'll segue to our Department of Health and Human Services with regards to their presentation and overview, because that is one of the entities that's in the better positions to help coordinate some of these efforts with all of our key partners and stakeholders. But we've got a couple of lights on, so I will defer now to Council Chair Rice and followed by Councilmember Glass.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just very briefly, and Amanda, you highlighted this when you talked about some of the existing programs and the need for expansion, especially when it comes to KIND, as well as Women Who Cares and all the others who do the weekend backpacks. One of the things as we continue to provide support for each of them individually is how we can better coordinate these efforts. Because what we want to do is, while there's great work being done in each of those individually, we have to be more strategic about the approach. Something that the Council President has really tasked us with this year has been how strategically can we leverage those resources that are doing so great, but then allow for them to really get at the need that we have that continues to grow in the community in those areas where I think we're still not scratching the surface as much as we could. And so from that perspective, I just look forward to working with your organization as well as with the organizations who are doing the work themselves to really come together to figure out a strategic plan for us moving forward. I think that, again, and this tees up for Dr. Gales, similar to what we asked for when it came to our nursing issues and increasing the number of nurses that we have, I think at this point it behooves us working under the auspices of the Food Council in terms of what they laid out to really create this strategic plan for us in terms of what it is that we want to see and how we want that to be rolled out. I'll just speak to, and of course MCPS can talk for themselves, but I will just say that one of the things that we've talked about with a lot of our leadership within the school community is about the pluses and minuses of having all day round school. And it certainly was one in which we saw with the Bell program that was spearheaded by the Council President to be able to look at the summer slide. But what we also talked about is the true need that's out there for students who we knew who were food secure because they were in school. And then because they weren't in school any longer, were now food insecure. And that says something, because there where you're getting the breakfast and lunch and then can kind of fend for dinner and figure something out, right? Even though it's still not as secure as what we would like to have, still represents some consistency for our kids. But when those two meals are then eliminated, that breakfast and lunch are no longer there, then it creates a tremendous challenge where then you're fending the entire day to figure out what's going to happen. And we know for way too many of our kids that's far too often. So I think that we really have to also talk about strategy when it comes to what it is that we're looking to see. It's great to have it with these regional school sites, but in reality it's something that not only from a perspective of food security, but also from a perspective of the schools themselves in terms of efficacy, having that retention of learning, all those kinds of things really says that we may want to look at, for so many reasons, pursuing the direction that the Bell program led in for many, many years. So,
Councilmember Glass.
Ms. Nestor, thank you for the presentation. And I just want to make sure that I heard something correct. which to me is the headline out of this hearing, that 60% of eligible SNAP and users or beneficiaries do not apply for that benefit.
64% of people who are eligible for SNAP are not on SNAP. So,
Yeah.
There's a lot of reasons for that, but SNAP outreach is a very...
Absolutely, and you did a fair job of explaining the emotional, political situation in which we're operating in today, why some people might demur from utilizing benefits to which they're entitled. And, just because the mic is on right now, as we enter into this census counting, there might be some way to not only count people, but explain to them the benefits which they are duly entitled to, which will help with this conversation as well. Thank you.
Council President Navarro.
Thank you. I think that this thread of conversation is super important because as you were mentioning, for example, the demographics that MANA serves, and then we see that was quite the data point that WIC utilization, I think the highest in the United States, and then you look at the SNAP issue. I think there's room there for that kind of strategizing, and I go back to the reason why the racial equity and social justice legislation is so important, because it is difficult to tease these things out. But again, if we're going to truly get into serving the need, we have to understand what are the issues and the barriers. Also, the capacity of staff that we have to tease those things out, right? And whether there is cultural competency, whether there is language capacity. I mean, all of these things go into play because, as I've said, before, it's not about the changing demographics. It's about the demographics. Like, this is who we are. I'm really interested in figuring out those kinds of conversations and what is the strategy forward to get to, the bottom of some of these type of barriers. It is not an easy task, especially under the circumstances that we're operating under, where every day you wake up and there might be a different executive order that changes the rules of engagement for people who are, applying for some kind of immigration status. The bottom line is that people are trying to be as cautious as possible. And you know what? I don't blame them, because if I were in that situation and I wake up on a Monday morning and the rules have changed after the fact, I mean, that is significant. But then again, we need to understand what is the impact, and then how can we respond to that. So I really do appreciate those points that you highlighted, and I hope that we can all come to some kind of agreement on how to move forward and how to tease out how to mitigate that. Thank you.
Councilmember Jolanda.
Thank you, and thanks for the very thoughtful presentation. On the additional research piece, one of the things I remember working on this issue in years past, this under-enrollment has been an issue for a long time for many communities. And I remember seeing something about if you got people with SNAP in particular signed up within the first, or WIC eligible in the first 2 weeks when the mom has a baby, for example, or that they're much more likely to persist and stay in the program and access other benefits. And two questions. Where are you, the research that is done, where were you pulling the funding from to do what you've done so far? And you mentioned it 3 times. And how else can we support, and what other data points do you think we need to know so that we can deliver the comprehensive type of services and close the gaps that we're talking about today?
Wow, that's a big question.
And I know it is, but maybe just how did the research you've got so far, you dedicate some of the budget? What are you getting the funding for it, and what are some of just an illustrative list of questions you think need further analysis? To try to shorten it. That might be even bigger, but.
You mean where does the Food Council get the funding? So from
I know from us, but that's my point. I'm just trying to tee up. I'm trying to throw you a softball. Yes.
Well, yes, and we wouldn't be able to do what we do without the hundreds of partners that we work with. We have been engaging, specifically on your point, to signing people up for WIC. We've been engaging with the hospital community as well. We have a working group that has a healthcare and food access subgroup. So looking at where in the process of the labor and delivery ward there could be a screening of pregnant women or women who have just given birth, and how we can then make sure that they're referred efficiently to the procedures, and then also looking at the emergency department as well as a way to screen and refer people. But I think the really big questions are, yes, funding to do more research, to think about pilot programs, to change the EMR systems in hospitals, especially to be able to do screen and intervene across the board, but mainly also to think about ways in every service and program. My fantasy would be anyone in need in Montgomery County, when they go to ask to subscribe to a program, whether it is not even for food insecurity, just to childcare or help with their housing, anything like that, they would get asked a set of questions about their access to food. And if they screen positive, they would be handed resources. Ideally, it would be a warm handoff where there would be a referral that's followed up. But at a minimum, they would be handed a food assistance resource directory, they'd be handed a list of local resources that they would actually be able to then go in their language and then be able to go and follow up on. We're also, to your point, Madam President, looking at, we have a culturally appropriate food subgroup as well that's looking at how to make sure that the food that people receive from food assistance providers is food that they recognize and food that they want to eat. Because it's all very well handing someone a sweet potato, but if they've never eaten one before or know how to prepare it, then it just goes in the trash.
Well, I'd love to follow up and work with you on whether it's our hospitals or healthcare providers. I know we have many great partners who do many good things, but on this, the data that we need to know so that we can close these gaps, I think, and how we can support on the council, I think you're hearing a lot of excitement and energy and desire to want to make more progress here. So thank you for the work that you've already done.
Thank you very much, and we do appreciate your support. Thank you.
All right, I want to do a quick time check. We have two more presentations. It's about 3:15, but we've got about another 15 or so minutes what we had allocated, but if we need to go a little bit longer, this is an important issue, but I also want to be respectful of all of my colleagues' times and schedules. So let's move on to the next presentation. Dr. Gales.
All right, good afternoon again, and this is the third time you've all heard me today, so I will keep it brief and allow for our partners and colleagues to be able to share the great work that they're doing. I want to actually specifically just address some of the questions that you brought up in lieu of a presentation. So two big things. We, as HHS, are working to build upon the work that's being done, but frame food security in multiple ways to increase the ability to convene and set some countywide standards. So we know historically we talk about food insecurity in the context of hunger, but we also are increasing, including in that conversation of food insecurity's contribution to obesity and type 2 diabetes in particular, because we know that when folks are in particular our programs throughout the county has seen a 65% reduction in hemoglobin A1Cs for those individuals who participate in our food insecurity programs. That's significant because, as you know, that's one of the leading initiatives for the State Department of Health and one of our leading initiatives as we move forward in chronic disease management. We also know that food insecurity contributes significantly to stress and other exposures that are detrimental to health outcomes. So to that end, we have been integrating, we have moved our food security planner that Amanda mentioned, Diana, to within the Healthy Montgomery group. And so we are looking at food security across all of our different health initiatives and conditions and integrating food security as a variable in all of our chronic disease discussions. Because as to your point, we should be screening for that, and when we identify at what other forum the person is in, we should be able to work to integrate them and link them to services. That also underscores the work and the transitions and enhancements we are creating in our eligibility process, working with our safety net services that we provide to the community, making sure that when individuals do come in and are looking for access to primary care health coverage, we also have some mechanism to be able to identify needs such as food insecurity and get them linked to additional services that they may be eligible for. And this also fits nicely within our health and all policies approach, again, to the multiple questions about data. This is what we like to do. We like to have this conversation. We continue to ask those questions because the same drivers, particularly when we're talking about equity from a social justice perspective and racial justice perspective, a lot of the same variables that are driving food security, insecurity, are the same variables driving our housing differences, our education gaps, our chronic disease gaps. And so what we're...
Can you say that again?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Especially with regards to the housing.
Yes. So when you look across all variables, so housing, transportation, education, the same things that are the root causes that are driving food insecurity are coming up over and over again. It comes up when we talk about type 2 diabetes. It comes up when we talk about HIV. And so we have to start asking the questions to empower policymakers with the data that shows here is how these variables contribute to health outcomes. And so we have been pushing that, and we will be releasing shortly our health equity index that I referenced before in our Board of Health presentation to, again, help empower policymakers as well as community folks to show the impact of that work. So those are just some of the examples of what we're doing from a global perspective in HHS to be able to empower the community to do the work and, again, be able to tie these things together and show how all of these variables play a role in the health and all policies approach. So those, I think that covers what I wanted to cover, because like I said, I would prefer to give the colleagues the floor to be able to share the work that they're doing.
Thank you, Dr. Gales. And I think your zip code analysis on life expectancy, I mean, you can draw a straight line between food security issues because the quality of the food that people are eating, they'll eat what's cheapest, and that unfortunately often correlates to fast food as an example. So it does have major implications all the way around. Thank you. Turning over to our colleagues in the Department of Recreation and deferring to Ms. Adrienne Clutter.
Excellent, thank you. First, I really need to say thank you to our former director, Councilmember Arbanaz, and our current director, who are so innovative in helping us launch the mobile aspect of our food program. Montgomery County Recreation is part of a national campaign in park and recreation agencies to increase the opportunities to have access to meals. As you know, health and wellness is our mission. And we've been able to be nationally recognized for our mobile program, both by the National Recreation Parks Association and No Kid Hungry Maryland. And so we're excited for that. We must thank Montgomery County Public Schools, the Division of Food and Nutrition Services. I'll tell you, before I came to Montgomery County, I did this type of work in Prince George's County, and it wasn't this easy. And Montgomery County Public Schools has not turned us away on any crazy idea when it comes to reaching out to young people. And I also have two really key staff people that I need to thank, Miranda Williams and Sarah Swar, who are our liaison that work regularly with Montgomery County Public Schools and always exploring new sites and trying to overcome the barriers such as the construction and the limitations that allow us to serve meals. We have a few types of programs where young people access meals. As mentioned earlier in the presentation, we have our summer camp programs, which are our traditional camps, our therapeutic recreation camps. We have our widely popular Summer Fun Center, which also serves as really affordable, heavily subsidized program in affordable care, which serves meals. One of the things that I wanted to note about that program is that without the food being served, we would be tapping into our programming budget to serve kids, to feed kids. And so that is definitely a benefit by having that program available to us, because we do have locations that aren't within the qualifying zone, summer locations, and we know kids in those communities. We have Scotland would probably be a good example of a community where it's a more vulnerable community surrounded by affluence, and so we are having to come out of our program budgets. And our goal is to make sure 100% of our sites, of our programs that qualify, are participating in summer meals. And we also heard about the summer snack program, where we're able to, at some of our locations, send kids home with summer snacks for the weekends, or smart snacks rather. The mobile site, there's something we're very proud of the recreation, because it does help to remove barriers such as just registration in general. Folks are afraid to register. And so when we're going out into communities and no registration is required in advance, you show up. Our staff are very good at working with folks to get the required basic information, such as the health and safety information of participants, so they can remain safely on the site. And I thank my staff, because I tell them our goal is not to turn any young people away. We certainly know we don't for the 18 and under drop-in, but there's a lot of overlaying benefits here as well. If you might note that for the Fun Food Fitness program, it employs TeenWorks. So it doubles as youth workforce development. Also, we encourage our TeamWorks, many who are trying to support their families as well, helping to keep the lights turned on, are taking advantage of eating the meals and not spending their hard-earned paycheck on Chipotle or something like that. And so there's all these overlaying benefits. One of the things we're seeing from our families is we know that the investment, the return on investment to families, we talk about the food insecurity part of it, but if a young person is taking advantage of the meal and they come for the 6 weeks, on a low estimate, it's around $100 that the parent is saving per child. So the impact on family budgets is critical for us and definitely noteworthy. In recreation, we're looking for more creative ways with Montgomery County Public Schools and our partners to see if we can't expand our mobile sites and do more outreach.
Great. I know one of the more popular classes through EBB were the cooking classes. Does that continue to be the case? Those always fill up quicker than most of the other classes, I think in part to learn how to cook, but also to eat, which are pretty popular.
Absolutely. Nutrition education is something we've worked on as well. We've had really fantastic relationships with the Alliance for a Healthier Generation, who I know the Montgomery County Public Schools is working with now as well, and out-of-school time efforts, and offering nutrition classes when we can in those programs, widely popular. We've had parents report back that their young people are coming home and giving them shopping lists.
Great. That's fantastic. Well, I see no other lights. I think this was a very comprehensive presentation, to say the least. Lots to follow up on, and clearly something we'll be tracking closely moving forward. Appreciate all the efforts, and this joint work session is adjourned.
Just wanted to make an announcement for anyone who was waiting for our Education and Culture Committee meeting for the briefing on Sandy Spring Museum. Unfortunately, we have had to reschedule that, and we rescheduled that for a later date. So, thank you.